So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a fifth-generation Floridian, born and raised in Plant City, Florida, which is a small town outside Tampa. Publicly educated, went to the University of Florida, have a degree in accounting, master's of accounting and law degree from Florida, and a master's of law in international law from Stetson University College of Law. I started practicing at a law firm in Tampa doing business litigation. I then became a federal prosecutor. I prosecuted in Jacksonville and Tampa, guns, drugs, fraud crimes, and became a judge in 2006. Served on the bench over a decade and resigned that position.
To run for Attorney General?
After a lengthy discussion with my law enforcement husband about moving from a two-income family to a one-income family to run for the office of Attorney General.
And why do you want to be Attorney General?
Well, as you can imagine, in my home, we have probably very different conversations about the criminal justice system. I was a judge for many years, sat in the felony criminal courts. My husband's in law enforcement. As a judge, if you're doing your job right, you are very limited in what you can do and say. And I noticed very particular issues in Florida that, because of my experience and my perspective, I could have a proactive effect in this state. And I'm excited to get started. It's been a challenging year. I'm also a mother, trying to balance a statewide campaign with motherhood. But, you know, it's important right now. It's important that we have someone in this role of top cop, top prosecutor that is not a politician, that actually understands what it means to lead investigations and prosecute cases, and I'm excited to start working.
So what are some of your priorities?
Well, since day one, I've been talking about the opioid epidemic. We lose more people now to the opioid crisis than we do to car accidents and gun violence. I'm a former drug prosecutor. My husband is a DEA agent. We are committed to this. It is not a situation, and I don't need to tell you this, that we're going to be able to arrest our way out of. It's going to be a three-part attack: education, addressing the addiction culture, and law enforcement efforts. And so with the right statewide group, working group, I believe that we can compare what's working, what isn't, where the monies that have been dedicated to this crisis should be going to make sure we're getting an efficient return on those monies, that we're not wasting resources, precious resources, and I'm excited to lead that effort. I've promised to start on day one, and I will.
All right, I want to take a step back on the role that the Attorney General plays, and let's start with a little bit of shorthand. You would be replacing Pam Bondi, who is term limited out. Do you see yourself as continuing an extension of the policies that Pam Bondi had in place for the last 8 years, or where would you see you being different from Pam Bondi?
Well, I am my own independent person. Of course, we came to this role different routes. We were both prosecutors, but I also was a business litigator and a judge for over a decade. And so we certainly will have different approaches, different perspectives on things.
Can you give me an example where you may have disagreed with Pam Bondi, some of the decisions that she made?
Well, a lot of times decisions in the office depend on where you can dedicate resources and where you have structured your office to direct efforts and use resources that have been given you. So I will tell you that one of the things that she did was she focused on making sure that within our tests that had been done in our forensic labs as to rape kits, that those resources were dedicated. She advocated for that. We caught up in the backlog of those. I would want to focus a lot on focusing on some of the crimes where technology can be involved, bringing our investigators and our prosecutors up to speed that have a database background.
Let me just sort of jump in with some specifics, because one of the areas that Attorney General Bondi has been criticized on is that she often sides herself with lawsuits against the federal government or against other interests with other Republican attorney generals. One lawsuit in particular that's gaining a lot of notice is that she is joining, I think it's like 19 other attorney generals, Republican attorney generals, to have the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, struck down as unconstitutional, which would mean striking down the provisions on pre-existing conditions. If you're the Attorney General, will you continue that lawsuit? Will you continue to keep the state of Florida in that lawsuit to do away with Obamacare and the idea of covering pre-existing conditions?
So that is a suit that was started, I believe, back in February. Obviously, I will look at all pending litigation and determine whether or not the resources dedicated to that are going towards the interest of Floridians.
So you're not sure?
No, I'm absolutely sure. With regards to that specific litigation, I would continue it, but that litigation involves whether or not the federal government overreached into something that's been traditionally regulated by the states. I absolutely encourage our lawmakers to ensure that we can provide healthcare, access to healthcare and insurance for those with pre-existing conditions. But the lawsuit should not be framed as merely, do we support trying to help people with pre-existing conditions get insurance or not? The lawsuit is whether or not the federal government was right in enacting that legislation, and whether or not that's something that should be left to the states. And I can tell you,
but even Rick Scott has
absolutely will be addressed if it is left to the states and that lawsuit is successful. I will encourage our lawmakers, as will our leaders, to make sure that those people are covered.
But there's no guarantee. The only guarantee that they have now that they're covered is under the Affordable Care Act. And even Governor Scott has been critical and distanced himself from Pam Bondi's decision. This is a quote from Rick Scott: "I disagree with efforts to dismantle protections for those with pre-existing conditions." And he distanced himself from Pam Bondi specifically. So by moving ahead with the lawsuit, you may in fact strike down those pre-existing conditions with no guarantee of a replacement. Isn't that correct?
The lawsuit merely protects Florida's interest, and whether or not that is an area of regulation and lawmaking that should be left to Florida. I can tell you, Governor Scott is supportive of Pam Bondi. She has been a leader in many criminal justice efforts because she's a prosecutor, not a politician like me. I have been a prosecutor. I have led investigations. I have been a judge. Whether or not this lawsuit is successful or not, our leaders will still be expected to ensure that those with pre-existing conditions have access to health care and insurance.
1.7 million Floridians are currently covered under Obamacare. That's a lot of people who will be in jeopardy.
It is a mistake to believe that if this lawsuit is successful in protecting the traditional interests of Florida, regulating itself within this market, to mean that Florida will not provide access or health care to those with pre-existing conditions. That's not the case.
Your opponent, Sean Shaw, I interviewed him recently. He said that if he's elected Attorney General, he would immediately launch investigations into Donald Trump's business holdings here in Florida. What's your reaction to that?
You know, an Attorney General is charged with making very serious determinations as to whether to prosecute, whether to litigate. It is an important responsibility, one that I take very seriously, which I believe is why I've been endorsed by every statewide law enforcement organization, the Florida Chiefs of Police, nearly 90% of Florida sheriffs, independent, Republican, and Democrat, because they know that I will fully vet allegations. I take the decision whether to litigate very seriously. I'm the daughter and granddaughter of judges. I have a reverence for our legal system. I am not going to go out and call press conferences to draw attention to myself. I will make vetted, deliberate decisions in the best interest and for the protection of Floridians.
Did Pam Bondi, because the way the pendulum is, Sean Shaw seems to want to be very aggressive towards Donald Trump. Pam Bondi was criticized for not really doing any due diligence against Donald Trump, passing on the Trump University fraud allegations, sending them off to New York rather than investigating them here. How do you how do you view that in terms of, are you more in line with the Pam Bondi approach of giving the president a pass on some of these things, or along the Sean Shaw line of these need to be investigated?
Let me just say, one thing that should be clear to every Floridian, and is one of the reasons I am running, is because our system of justice, the person charged with leading as the chief legal officer of this state, the Attorney General, must make serious decisions without regard for political bias, without regard for who is interested in the outcome. And that is decisions that have to be made on a daily basis. I have demonstrated over the course of my career that I can make these serious decisions, that I can be fair, and I will always put justice ahead of winning at all costs. And I will leave the political arena out of my decisions.
The NRA is suing the state over the Stoneman-Douglas bill. Among other the provisions are there's a provision to raise the age to possess a gun from 18 or to purchase a gun from 18 to 21. As Attorney General, would you defend the state against the NRA in that suit, or where do you stand on the issue of raising the age from 18 to 21? And if the legislature passed it, will you defend it?
Well, the legislature did pass it, and it was signed into law, and the Attorney General's office currently is involved in defending that law, and I would continue to defend that. The Attorney General is charged with defending the laws passed by the legislature, and I'm going to go back to something I just said a moment ago, and this oath and this responsibility, this charge of the person that the voters elect, the role should be fulfilled without regard for whether or not the Attorney General agrees with the policy or every element, including within a statute. And so, yes, I would continue to defend the law. Of course, as an officer of the court, any constitutional concerns I had, I would present, as any person, any lawyer in court will do if there's contrary authority. But I would continue to fulfill the oath.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I think what I heard you saying, because I've read what you've said before, do you believe the raising the age from 18 to 21 is unconstitutional?
I believe there are some arguments to that effect. So, you know, if there is authority against an argument that someone is making in court, a lawyer, and at the end of the day, whoever's elected Attorney General is a lawyer making an argument in court, such contradictory authority will have to be presented. But, you know,
so
if there's a good,
let me finish for
I
don't understand what you mean by that.
I'm going to finish.
Okay.
If there is a good faith basis to defend the law, then the Attorney General should do so. That's their oath, and I will.
So would you defend the raising of the age from 18 to 21?
I answered that, and yes, I'd continue to defend that law.
Do you believe there's racial bias in the criminal justice system?
I believe that every day good men and women are elected as judges and state attorneys and hired as prosecutors that make decisions based on the law and try to do their job in a way that they are serving the interests and protecting Floridians. Whether there is inherent bias, I think is something that people have argued for many years. We as judges trained on that specifically. But I can tell you that my colleagues, myself, both as a prosecutor and a judge, every decision I made, I based on the law and the facts and circumstances before me.
Do you support Amendment 4, the restoration of civil rights?
I support streamlining that process. There's an enormous backlog right now, and I've been on record and talked about the fact that we as stewards of the state need to make sure that when we have a process in place that we are being efficient with taxpayer money and making sure that if people are due hearings, they're given hearings. So I would work to streamline that process. I would also support automatic restoration for less violent, less serious crimes.
So I just want to be clear. When it comes to Amendment 4, you'll be voting no?
Amendment 4 allows crimes to be the rights for felons to be automatically restored, including armed robbery, kidnapping, aggravated assault. There are some crimes I think that will be automatically restored that I believe should include a more thorough hearing. And so while I don't support Amendment 4, I do support streamlining that process, making it so that hearings can be obtained quicker and that we can eliminate that backlog.
I mean, there's tens of thousands of cases backlogged.
I agree with you. It's an obvious backlog in those hearings, and I want to be a leader in that. I want to be a part of it. I've said that this entire campaign.
All right. And I'm assuming you support Amendment 6 for the protection of defendants' rights? Or victims' rights? I apologize.
I do. You know, there are already victims' rights that are afforded. As judges, we were always mindful of that and respected those in court. This will ensure more privacy notice of hearings. So yes, I would support that.
All right. Ashley Moody, thank you very much for coming in.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much.